All right, good evening, everyone. My name is Andy Salas, and I am the Humane Educator for DuPage County Animal Services, and I will be your presenter today for Understanding Enrichment. So it is 7 o'clock now, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Just some quick Zoom housekeeping. I will be providing some time at the end of the presentation to answer questions for anybody that has any that pop up. So if you look on your screen that you are watching on, you should have a menu bar along the bottom of your screen. You will see there is a Q&A option. That is where I will be looking for questions at the end of the presentation, but you don't have to wait to enter them in. So if you have a question that pops into your head midway through, definitely feel free to type it in there, and I will go through any questions that are entered into that section at the very end of the presentation. Everybody is muted for right now, except for me, and I'm going to try to keep it that way so that way we don't have any background noise or anything else that's distracting. So again, any questions, concerns, comments, throw them in that Q&A section and I'll address them at the end of the presentation. So let's go ahead and get started. Again, today we are going to be talking about enrichment. And I am going to use a wide variety of species as examples for how enrichment can work. So this won't be just dog only, but I will be applying these concepts to a wide variety of different animals to hopefully help inspire you to enrich your own pets in your own homes as well. So let's go ahead and kick off. So for this presentation, again, all about enrichment, which is my favorite topic. I am obsessed with understanding the behavioral needs of as many species as I can and really pinpointing how we can better provide for them and improve their quality of life in captivity. So to do that properly, you really need to have a good understanding of what enrichment is exactly. So for this presentation, we will be talking about the early days of enrichment, where we started to see an interest in animal welfare in regards to fulfilling all of their needs, and then how it evolved, and then ultimately how we developed the categories of enrichment that we see addressed today in zoos, shelters, other animal welfare organizations, and in people's homes as well. I will end the presentation today by discussing how to create an effective enrichment plan in your own home, how you can manage enrichment opportunities, and how you can really assess and determine if you are in fact meeting the needs of your pet, which is something that I see a lot of owners try really hard and then fall a bit short on. So we'll talk about why that occurs and how we can prevent that from happening in the future as well. So let's kick off by really defining what enrichment is. You've probably all heard the term a ton, especially recently. It is the hot new buzzword in animal welfare. It's all about enrichment, enrichment, enrichment. And you're seeing it in shelters, you're seeing it in zoos, you're seeing it incorporated into training plans, and of course we're seeing it being brought into our home as well, and that's a really wonderful thing, again, as long as we have a clear understanding of what we're doing. Now that is what we're going to focus on today, but right now I'd also like to dispel some I don't know, negative commentary that I've heard about enrichment. So I have heard folks say, well, wild animals don't need you to make new toys for them every day, and you don't need to hide food for animals in the wild, and we're just spoiling our pets now. And of course, I'm showing you a picture on the side of my kitten on her, fourth kitten tower with balls and feathers and fake mice and everything else. So it very much so might look like we're just pampering and spoiling our pets, but we are in fact providing them with necessary outlets so they can demonstrate species-specific behavior. And the naysayers of enrichment are exactly right. We don't have to do this for wild animals because their environment is enriching in and of itself. But we've removed a lot of our domesticated animals from those environments. So now it's our responsibility to provide opportunities for them to express these natural behaviors in our own homes, backyards, farms, wherever we might be keeping our pets. So let's really talk about what enrichment really is. So it is a really rich and complex topic, and there are hundreds, if not thousands, of definitions out there. My favorite is from Hal Markowitz, who is really regarded as the father of enrichment. So we'll talk about him here in just a moment. But he defines enrichment as the process of providing captive animals with some form of stimulation in order to encourage natural behaviors, which helps to improve or maintain their physical and mental health. In a very simple sense, it is giving the animal something to do so that they are happy and healthy. Now, the key words there is natural behaviors. So that's what we're looking for. We're looking for our animals to exercise behaviors that they should be demonstrating naturally. And we're also looking to maintain or improve upon the physical and mental state of our animals. So that's really the goal of enrichment. So it's all about demonstrating species-specific behavior in a safe manner, so safe for the animals, but also safe for us and safe for our homes and our stuff. So we'll talk about this in a little bit, but scratching for cats is definitely a species-specific behavior that they should demonstrate. But of course, we don't want them demonstrating that on our sofas. So we'll talk about how we positively direct animals to appropriate locations and items for exercising those species-specific behaviors as we move through the presentation. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look where it all began. So I always like to show images from early zoos just so we can see the stark contrast between zoos of our past and zoos today. I know everybody has very mixed feelings about zoos. We either love them or we hate them, or we feel very uncomfortable about the animals being in captivity. And I always like to stress to folks that zoos have come such a long way, all because of enrichment. So the lions pictured here were actually in a 1920s Los Angeles zoo. So you can see there really wasn't a lot going on there. Concrete walls, concrete floor, bars in the front, no places to hide, to climb, to dig. There's no natural terrain. There's really nothing. There's just nothing there. And they're doing exactly what I would expect animals to do in that environment. They're laying there, leaning towards the bars and staring out at the only stimulation that they have available to them. And because this is how we treated animals in the past, we saw a lot of negative consequences. So we saw increased aggression in captive animals, and we also saw stereotypical behaviors, which is something that we still see in zoos today. You may even see in your home. You may see in animal sanctuaries as well. But that's where an animal is demonstrating a repetitive behavior that seemingly has no purpose. So in the sheltering world, we see that sometimes with dogs that are stressed, they spin and spin and spin and they just don't stop. We see it at zoos. So polar bears are notorious for this, where they pace back and forth and back and forth. That's an indicator that some need is not being met. And in most cases, that will be noted by professionals working with those animals, and they will then work to adjust their enrichment program to better meet the needs of those animals. But back in the 1920s, we didn't know what that meant. We didn't have a good grasp of animal behavior and cognition at this point. And so the animals were left in these barren enclosures, and as we watched them pace and circle and pant, we didn't really think much about it until we finally had somebody come and take a look for us. So the beginning of animal enrichment really did start in the early 1920s through Robert Yerkes. So Robert Yerkes was a professor who studied primate behavior, specifically cognition. So they weren't looking for the primates in their studies to demonstrate species-specific behaviors. They really initially didn't really care too much if they were happy. They just needed them to be alive and capable of performing during these psychological and cognitive tests. But what Robert Yerkes noticed was how unhappy many of these primates were, how they would demonstrate stereotypical behavior and even self-injurious behavior because they were stressed and had no outlet for their energy, no place to put all that brain power. And so he noted that if we just gave them something to do, they seemed better off. Now, very basic enrichment. They were talking about giving them a stuffed toy to play with, maybe scattering food on the floor. Nothing really profound, but at least that started people thinking about what we needed to be providing for animals. So again, really non-climactic, I suppose, beginnings, but it got us starting to think that animals did in fact have more than just a physical need to be met in regards to feeding, watering, and providing shelter. They had emotional and mental needs as well that we also needed to address to provide quality of life, and also even in terms of research to get reliable results, because we all know that if we're stressed or tired or anxious and we take a test, we're not going to do well. It's going to be the same things with animals involved in research. So that really motivated a number of behavioralists and specialists in the animal world to really start to apply themselves and think clearly about how we can better enable species-specific behaviors in captivity. So we saw a couple notable pioneers come from this movement. Heini Hediger is one. She is a famous zoologist, and she published extensively on the human responsibility of care. So she put a lot of responsibility on our shoulders. We took these animals out of the wild, we held them in captivity, whether that be for zoos, for research, or through domestication for farm animals or companion animals. So it is therefore our responsibility to provide for them. And she's not wrong. So that really lit a fire, and that got a lot of folks thinking about how we could better meet those needs. And then we see Hal Markowitz really coming into his own in the early 1950s in the zoo world. He really was instrumental in developing the zoo enrichment programs that we see in place today. And not only was he focused on creating all of these new awesome enrichment ideas, but he started to develop a process to assess and redesign enrichment programs as needed. So it really wasn't until we got to Hal that we noticed that it wasn't a one-size-fits-all. Up until then, we definitely saw improvements, but it was basically the same stuff. Give them a toy, right? Throw food on the ground and have them walk around and eat rather than give it to them in a bowl. Very basic things, and we applied the same concepts to every animal, regardless of age, gender, species. Nothing really mattered. It was just kind of same idea. Here's your toy. Now your life is better. But Hal really questioned that and developed ways to assess if needs were really being met. And that really comes down to identifying the general species-specific behaviors of the species you're working with, and then the individual preferences of the animal in front of you. Now, all of the enrichment programs that we see today are really centered around this concept of the 5 freedoms, which are the tenets that animal welfare advocates work around, and anybody working in the animal industry hopes to maintain for any animals in their care. So we have freedom from hunger and thirst, meaning that we provide access to clean and nutritious food and fresh water. Freedom from discomfort, which means that we provide an appropriate environment and space to rest for any animal. Freedom from pain, injury, and disease, which is the provision of appropriate preventative measures to hopefully ward off any injury or illness, but also providing prompt treatment if an injury or illness were to occur. Freedom to express normal behavior, which is access for the animal to sufficient space, terrain, other animals, whatever it may be, for them to demonstrate those species-specific behaviors. And then freedom from fear and distress, which is the provisions of conditions and treatment to avoid mental suffering. And you will find here in just a moment, as I share with you the many categories of enrichment that animal professionals strive to meet, that we do address all of the 5 freedoms, but in particular, freedom from discomfort, freedom to express normal behavior, and freedom from fear and distress. So those are the big focuses, but you definitely will see the freedom from hunger and thirst, and to a lesser extent, freedom from pain, injury, and disease. But there is an opportunity to even include enrichment into that freedom as well. Now, understanding that we have this entire enrichment program built on those 5 tenets and really developed from the observations of Hal Markowitz, and really identifying that every animal as an individual has different needs, and then of course every different species is going to have different needs as well. We now see enrichment as a regular component of animal care. It is a standard practice in any accredited zoo. They will have an extensive enrichment program developed for every single animal on that property. It is well utilized in animal shelters. So at DuPage, we have just an astounding team of volunteers that dedicate their time to providing enrichment to our animals to really bring some spice to their daily life and keep them sane while they're there and waiting for a family. And we also see enrichment incorporated into most training programs as well. And that's something that I advocate for anyone looking for a trainer. When you really want to assess them and assess their credentials and credibility, ask them about enrichment and how they incorporate that into their training programs, because it definitely should be included as some aspect. And of course, now today we're also seeing owners really seeking enrichment opportunities for their pets, which is awesome. So even here on the slide, this is a picture of one of my pooches at the store, and she was falling in love with these new toys that she encountered, which are just rope and rubber toys, nothing particularly fancy about them, except they have sense infused into the toys themselves. So you can provide a whole slew of different types of enrichment for them just through giving them one ball or one rope. So we'll talk about that in a little bit later, and you'll see what I mean about meeting multiple enrichment needs. But what I have been noting with owners developing their own enrichment programs is that they are always extremely well-intentioned, but not always well-rounded, which can lead to frustration, because I have encountered so many owners that they are bending over backwards, going above and beyond for their animals, and their animals are still stressed, or they're still wired all the time and ready to go, or they're still demonstrating stereotypical behaviors. There's a whole slew of things. And so I meet with people and they're at the end of the rope and they're like, I spend 6 hours a day doing enrichment, and we walk 10 miles and my dog is still nuts and my dog still can't focus, for example. And that's usually because you're doing a great job of meeting one enrichment need, but not all of the rest. So we have to make sure that we are adding some flavor and variability into our enrichment programs to meet all of our pets' needs and not just one or two. So this is where I see a lot of focus with owner-developed enrichment programs. And you can see some themes here. And obviously I'm using dogs as an example, but it's all about movement, right? So dog parks, daycare, physical exercise, going for walks and runs, playing fetch in the backyard. And all of that is fantastic, but it's not quite enough. So we're going to now move into categories of enrichment. So you can see all of the different ways that we need to provide for our animals to really allow them to exercise every species-specific behavior that we can really think of. So even here on the slide, this is my cat Bliss, and even just sitting here in a window, she is exercising some species-specific behaviors. So we'll talk about that here in just a second. All right, so now on to categories of enrichment, and please don't be overwhelmed by this very extensive list. When we talk about categories of enrichment, what has been established and developed in the zoo world has also transferred over into the domestic animal world as well. So these are the categories that we really want to focus on. So environment is one, and that can be something as simple as taking your pet somewhere new based on their comfort level. We'll talk about that in just a moment. But allowing them to explore new areas. It can be about modifying the environment that they currently live or exist in. It can be, well, again, so it can be travel, it can be modifying your environment in your home, and it can also include some of our other categories of enrichment, such as sensory enrichment. So you can alter the environment by also providing some sensory stimulation. So hitting on those 5 senses, whether that's taste, touch, smell, so on and so forth, hearing, and visual. We also have physical enrichment, which is the one that I feel like most owners hit on pretty regularly. So that's exactly what it sounds like. It's getting our animals out, allowing them to move and enjoy some level of physical activity, again, based on their capabilities. We have mental enrichment, which is really just getting their brains working and letting them think about their environment, letting them problem solve, again, all while exercising species-specific behaviors. We have social enrichment, and that one, again, it's also fairly self-explanatory. It's allowing them to socialize to their comfort level. We have calming enrichment, which is one a lot of folks don't think about. We need to encourage our pets to be able to relax. And again, this is going to encompass several of these categories of enrichment. To allow them to relax and to find comfort, we may be needing to alter their environment. So we're going to provide some environmental enrichment. We may need to incorporate some sensory enrichment, calming music, aromatherapy, things of that nature. We may need to provide them some physical exercise, so they might not be able to rest comfortably because they've just got a lot of pent-up energy. So you'll see as we carry on through this presentation, a lot of these enrichment categories are really deeply intertwined with one another. So when you strive to meet one, you're usually going to meet 3 or 4 at the same time. Now, carrying on with the categories that are available, diet and nutrition. That's another one that we don't always think about. So diet and nutrition can mean that we're meeting one of those 5 freedoms and providing nutritious food and clean, fresh water, but it can also relate to what we're feeding our pets. And that, of course, is 100% a personal choice and something that should be worked out between yourself and your veterinarian and working with your individual pet's needs. But I always caution folks against doing things like providing food 24/7 for an animal to graze on. When we're talking about our cats and our dogs, their bodies aren't designed to graze throughout the day, and that's not allowing them to demonstrate species-specific behaviors. So even just by breaking up whatever you're choosing to feed into different meal times, that can help enrich them in that diet and nutrition category. Then, of course, we can also enrich them here by providing variable foods, so providing them different textures, different flavors. We can look at very species-specific diets, so going back to what is most natural for them. But again, there's a lot of different things that we can do there in a category that seems relatively simple and straightforward. There's quite a few options available to you. Our next category is foraging. And that really ties in very closely with diet and nutrition. So diet and nutrition is going to be when we're providing food and what we're providing, and in some cases, what we're providing that food in or how we're preparing and serving it to our animals. Foraging is how they're working to get that food. So what they're going to need to do to acquire that food, and if they're being allowed to demonstrate species-specific behaviors in that acquisition of food and its consumption. The next category is hygiene and grooming. So that's exactly what it sounds like, making sure our pets are clean, making sure that if they need to be brushed, they're getting that nails are being trimmed. But again, in terms of enrichment, we are looking at ways to make this an engaging experience for our pets. So we really want to reduce any force that we're applying there. This is where we're going to tie in a lot of training so we can be more involved with cooperative care. And by doing that, we are going to be incorporating social and mental enrichment as well. And then also with hygiene and grooming, we have to think about our specific species. So for example, if you have a cat in your home, part of your hygiene and grooming enrichment is actually going to be not bathing them because cats shouldn't have baths. That can be very damaging to them physically, and it's also very damaging to them psychologically as well. So unless there's an emergency, cats don't get baths. And part of that enrichment is actually just providing them the environment that they feel calm enough and relaxed enough to groom themselves. The next category is medical or health. So again, this is going to be about making sure our pets get what they need to stay healthy, meeting those 5 freedoms. We want to make sure that we are preventing pain, disease, or injury. And we're going to do that from preventative medicine, whether that be vaccines, heartworm prevention. We can tie in diet and nutrition to that as well, making sure that they have a healthy, balanced diet. But also, just like we would with hygiene and grooming, medical and health can also engage mental and social, even sensory stimulation to better acclimate our pets to any care that they may absolutely require. So that way it isn't a stressful experience, but rather an enriching one. Our next category is security, and that is the creation of the perception of safety. So security is all about feeling safe. So we want to make sure that our pets feel safe 100% of the time. And then with that, we may be, again, encountering other areas of enrichment. If our pet doesn't feel safe in our home, it might be because there's a noise somewhere that's driving them bonkers, or they feel compelled to bark at a window 24/7 or anytime they see people walk by. So we need to alter and enrich their environment to change that sense of security, to make sure that they do feel safe, which then again ties into these other areas of enrichment, where they can feel calm and can relax, where they can engage better in training, so get mental enrichment, where they can socialize more effectively. So providing security helps with the other enrichment categories. The next category is safety, and that probably seems almost redundant with security, but they mean different things. So security is that you feel safe. So we're looking for feeling safe, but you may not actually be safe. Oh, I don't know. Let's see. I just watched a bunch of kids in my neighborhood go shooting down a hill on a skateboard. They feel safe, so they feel secure. They looked pretty confident in what they were doing. Were they actually physically safe? Debatable, right? So, you know, they turned themselves into a shot put going down a hill at seemingly 90 miles an hour. So maybe not, but they felt secure. So that's one area of enrichment checked off. Safety is making sure that your pet is safe. So we're providing, again, environmental enrichment in a safe way. So we're removing anything that they could harm themselves on. We're making sure they're not choking on toys. There's nothing like cords in the environment that they could chew on and hurt themselves with. When we're outside with our dogs, we're keeping them on a harness and leash, so that way they are physically safe. They're not going to dart in front of a car, for example. Our next category is independence. And independence is exactly what it sounds like. And we will talk about this particular category a bit more extensively later on. But it's allowing our pets freedom from ourselves and encouraging them to have that confidence to step away from us, to figure things out on their own, and to be comfortable even, again, engaging in other areas of enrichment like calming, for example, without us being right there beside them. And then the final category, you may have noticed I only have 13 listed here. The final category is instinctive behaviors. And I separated this one out, and this is one that we will talk about extensively here in just a moment, because this is the area where I see the most trouble with domesticated animals in homes. Instinctive behaviors are often the behaviors that we don't like very much. So again, with cats, for example, scratching, that's an instinctive behavior that most people are not overly fond of. Dogs, digging, barking, counter surfing, where they put those little paws up on your counter and try to help themselves to your dinner. Those are all behaviors that we're not overly fond of, but they are completely natural and instinctive behaviors that your animal must be able to demonstrate for complete mental and physical health. We just have to provide them an outlet that is not stealing our dinner off the counter and ripping holes in the back of our sofa. So we'll talk about that. But again, as we go through these categories, I'm going to focus most heavily on those that are lighting up in orange. So environment, sensory, physical, mental, social, foraging, and instinctive, we're going to include in that as well. So that's going to be our main area. But as I provide examples for each, also think about how they could be touching on calming and hygiene and security and safety, because you will see that, again, there's going to be a lot of overlap. And because I love my animals to death, I have a bunch of demonstrative videos for you. So this is actually my dog Groot, and he is paused in a very inopportune position here, but this is him at the Indiana Dunes. So I take him there almost every year for camping. And he's just having a good time on the beach. I'm not really doing anything with him. I was actually sitting there reading a book and letting him sniff around. He was rolling in the sand. He was watching people go by, really having a grand time. And by doing that, I was providing him environmental enrichment. So we've changed his environment. I've given him a whole new world to explore. We've got sensory enrichment. So there's tons of new smells. There's tons of new visuals for him. He loves watching the lake, and he people watches. So that was fantastic. He had social enrichment because he was hanging out with me and my nieces as we sat on the beach. Some physical enrichment, not necessarily right there in that video, but he was digging holes. You probably saw one next to him when the video started, which is also an instinctive species-specific behavior that also engages him mentally. And I have him contained safely. He has a harness and a lead on, and he feels secure. He's comfortable enough to roll around and flop about in the sand. So just by sitting on the beach with my dog, I've created this whole enriching experience that touches on a number of categories. So I always like to show simple videos like that, because I know when I show you these 14 categories of enrichment, it seems like, how do you ever meet all of their needs, right? But it can actually be pretty simple. So we're going to talk about that as we go on. I'm going to provide specific examples again for these categories that I have highlighted in orange, as they are the ones that are really most vital and then subsequently lead to enrichment in the other categories as well. So let's go ahead and start with environmental. So again, environmental is going to incorporate multiple enrichment categories unintentionally. You don't even have to work on it. So when we talk about environmental enrichment, one thing that I really like to stress to everyone is that you want to modify their environment or introduce new environments subtly. So if you've got a nervous dog, for example, which my dog Groot is a nervous kid. He had a pretty traumatic upbringing in his early years before he came to me. And going to new places was really stressful to him. So we didn't just hop in the car and shoot over to the Indiana Dunes one day. That was a progression that took actually a little over a year before we got there. Gently, encouraging him to go into a car, to drive down the street, to go around the block. And then we slowly expanded his travel time. We got him used to different novel environments gradually, lots of positive reinforcement, and always listening to him. Now, that is one way that you can provide enrichment, but you can also introduce novel stimuli into your current environment. So it's not always just about traveling. And sometimes it's just about allowing your animal freedom to express their existing environment. So that's actually my horse there, pictured on the slide. And this is enriching for him, and I'm not doing anything for him. I've just turned him out into one of the pastures at the barn where he can graze. So that's foraging behavior. It's species specific. It's physical because he's going to walk and move. It addresses diet and nutrition because he's eating the things that he should. But it's also environmental because he has this novel stimuli of the river that doesn't always present itself. It depends on where he's turned out on the barn property. And so you can see here, this is one of the first times he's been near the river that particular week when I took his photo, and he was engaging with the river. He was splashing in the water, he was drinking directly from it. So it was enriching for him in an environmental capacity as well. So this is how we really want to consider environmental enrichment. So again, exposure to a new environment. It can be manipulation of your existing environment, but again, I will stress slowly and gradually based on your pet's comfort level. And it's going to include multiple categories of enrichment. So you're going to see sensory, mental, physical, species specific, and you can probably tie in several other categories as well, depending on how you're altering your environment. Now, how to do it successfully? Make sure you're not adding any additional stress. So again, don't get fired up about this presentation and say, I'm going to enrich my dogs this weekend and throw them in a car and take them on a 6-hour car ride to go camping. That may not be something they're ready for. If that's something that they are ready for and they're confident and calm and maybe they've had some exposure to those things, awesome. Get them out into nature. That's one of the best ways to enrich our animals. But we want to make sure, again, that we are doing it at their comfort level. So add new enrichment slowly. Make sure you're avoiding flooding. So flooding is a concept where we just immerse an animal or human in stimulation until they adjust to it. So you may have heard of that with people. That's actually a therapy technique. If you're scared of snakes, you might get set down in a room surrounded by tanks full of snakes and then left in there until you can keep yourself calm. For humans, we call that exposure therapy. I personally don't advocate for it, but if a human chooses to do it, that's on us. But we want to make sure that we don't do that to our animals because they can't make an informed decision about whether or not that's right for them, and they can't really choose to do it or choose to get out of it. So we want to make sure that we don't put them in a situation where they feel flooded, where they're overwhelmed by stimuli. Slow and gradual is the key to success here. So you really want to work at your pet's pace and be prepared for having to call it a day a little early. Before I was able to take Groot camping at the Indiana Dunes, we tried camping in our backyard, and then we went to a local forest preserve. And there were a number of times where we had to call it quits and actually set up our tent. We started a fire, we're hanging out, he wasn't doing well, and we had to pack it all in and go home. You have to be willing to do that when you're working with your animals and exposing them to environmental enrichment. Now, our next category of enrichment is sensory, and this one is probably one of the easiest to address. You're just putting their senses to work by providing them with novel stimuli. So this is an example here. These are my dogs in our backyard, and you can see all of those funny colored cones all about my yard. I periodically will take those out and I just kind of toss them around randomly. In some cones, there's food. So under some of those cones, there is tuna. Under some of those cones, there's dehydrated bison lung. Under some of those cones, there's Cheerios, so nothing super exciting. And under a lot of the cones, there's nothing at all. So they have to use their nose to sniff around to find the cones with their desired treat item. They have to use their brains to figure out how to lift the cones up and flip them over to get the treat underneath. And we're also even addressing some physical enrichment as well, because they're going to trot around my yard while they do it. So that was an easy way to provide them with some sensory stimulation. So my main goal with this activity is olfactory. So I'm wanting them to use their nose, but they are going to use visual as well, because they're going to use their eyes to actually seek out the different cones to sniff in the first place. And then even passively, they are getting some auditory stimulation. There's cars going by in the background, they hear that. There's birds singing in the trees, so that's some auditory stimulation as well. And then, of course, they are going to be getting some oral stimulation from just consuming different textured foods, different flavors. And you can even argue for some tactile stimulation as well, as they trot around on the grass and even have to use their paws to flip over those plastic cones. So this simple activity, which took me 5 minutes to set up, actually took them about 30 to 45 minutes to complete, and touched on a lot of different areas of enrichment. And my kids, when they came back inside from doing this, they all flopped on the couch and said, you know what, we're done with today. You go ahead and do what you need to do. We're all good. Now, how to do this successfully? Maintain a variety of resources. So this is a little bit of a hole and a rut I see a lot of pet owners fall into. They may set up something like I have here with these different scent cones with treats underneath, but they use the same thing every time. Or we get fixated on one type of treat that we think must be awesome for them. You have to go by what your pet likes. So I use tuna because that's one of Groot's favorite things in this particular example, but next time we might use some baked chicken. The time after that, I might blop some peanut butter underneath all of those cones because I want to provide them with some variety so they don't get bored of this activity and basically see the cones outside and go, I don't care. I've done this too many times. I'm not interested anymore. We want to make sure we keep it fresh and engaging, but that we also recognize our pets' likes and dislikes. So there certainly have been times when I've tried to use maybe some commercial treats, for example, that my dogs just weren't fond of. And so when I tried that, this enrichment opportunity failed. So I had to reassess and then reevaluate what I was offering to provide them a more enriching experience. Now, other ways that you can put their senses to work, scent of the day. So that's something that I do, and I'll show you what my enrichment calendar looks like. Every day in my home, beds, maybe the couch, sometimes I'll use our sunroom, but I will spray different areas in the house with a different smell. So I just use diluted essential oils a lot of the time, but you can even use things like cinnamon or vanilla and just mix it with water and I spray it around. So my dogs, my cat, even my bearded dragon in my house have something new to smell, and they can actively search around and sniff, or even just by existing in that environment, it is now enriching because I've altered the environment in a subtle way, and I've asked them to use one of their senses to explore it. So that's a good way to keep them entertained and engaged. You can do nose work, which what I have shown here in this video is sort of a lazy form of nose work, but you can definitely do that where you're hiding usually high value items about, and you can make it easy where you just have it in different areas on the floor and let them sniff around. I always recommend doing that at first because we want our animals to be engaged, and if we make it too hard for them right off the bat, they're going to quit too early. So scent cones, even hiding treats in boxes and things like that, that's a little bit more advanced. So you start simple and then you can make it a little bit more difficult to sniff out those items, a little bit more difficult to obtain them. And then by doing that, you're engaging more mental and physical enrichment as well. You can provide some tactile stimulation by changing out their bedding. So all of my dogs have their own beds scattered around my house. And about once a week or so, I'll actually change out the blankets that they have. So this week, maybe it's fleece blankets. Next week, maybe I throw some towels over the top of their beds. It's just a different tactile experience. You can also do that with the toys that you provide as well. So soft and fluffy toys, hard, rough toys, all sorts of things can provide them with some tactile experiences. You can also address their olfactory, olfactory and oral stimulation with different flavors and textures of food. So they'll be able to sniff out all of those different variances, and then they'll actually get to physically taste all of the differences, feel different textures in their mouth. And then some of the easiest enrichment for us is TV and music. There's even so many channels on TV now that have been geared specifically towards animals that provide sounds and movements on the screen that are engaging for them. If you have an HD TV, your dogs and cats actually can see it and watch it quite well. So that's a good stimulation for them. And then music, same thing, depending on what you're hoping to achieve. Most people are looking for calm. You can play things like classical music, soft rock, reggae has even been scientifically demonstrated to relax animals. Just at a low tone, so they can listen in the background, and that can engage parts of their brain even as they just lay on the couch and relax in the middle of the afternoon. The next category of enrichment is our physical enrichment, which is the one I think that most owners do a pretty all right job on, because that's our primary focus. And I hear that a lot, especially when we're talking about dogs, that a tired dog is a good dog. And when I hear things like that, I will say that I agree, but also disagree, because we don't want to just take our animals out and run them ragged until they drop. We want our physical exercise to be productive, to have a purpose, and to be engaging for our animal. So for some, going out for a 10-mile run might be exactly what's on the order of the day for them, and they love it. For others, that might feel more like a chore than something fun, and it's not going to be as engaging. So you really have to think about what works for your pet. Now, benefits of exercise: increases serotonin, which is our happy hormone. So this is going to help keep our pets in a happier place mentally, which is always a bonus. It can reduce stress significantly. So if I do work with any animals that are suffering from anxiety, for example, we really want to address their physical exercise program. And that's certainly something that I'm sure we're all familiar with. If we're ever feeling down in the dumps, usually the first thing people recommend is to get up and go take a walk. It's because it works. It actually increases serotonin uptake in your brain, and it can help make you feel happier. It can also increase retention. Exercising can help dissipate stress hormones, which actually prevents us from learning and retaining memories. And it will activate different parts of the brain that allow animals to stay engaged for longer. So I always advocate for including some exercise into your pet's day before you try to train. So that way we get that big boost of serotonin, and they are less stressed, ready to listen, they're able to pay attention, they're more likely to retain. And it's also a neat trick if you are working on training and you feel like you've hit that brick wall and you're just not making progress, take an exercise break. Go play, take them for a walk, do something to, again, re-up that serotonin and get them ready to learn some more. Now, how we do it. Many animals will actually address this on their own. So again, make sure you're identifying the needs of your specific pet. If you've got a 16-year-old cat in your home, just them walking about the house, traveling from food bowl to litter box and back up to the couch is probably enough physical enrichment for them, and they've got that handled. And you'll find that most animals will handle it on their own, and they'll tell you if they need help. So if you've got one of those dogs that when you come home from work and try to sit on the couch, they're ping-ponging all over the place, they need some help. They're not able to meet their physical needs within the confines of the home while you're gone all day long. But if you're able to come home, sit on that couch, and they curl up next to you ready for a nap, then they're letting you know that they've met their physical needs for the most part. So if you want to do that walk, you want to play with them, that's awesome. But while physical exercise is definitely important, and I have obviously included it in the few categories I want to explicitly mention, to me, it's not one that I prioritize heavily, because just through normal day-to-day life, our animals generally meet their own needs. Again, unless we're talking about some extreme confinement, if they're in a kennel all day long, or if we've got some of those working breed animals that are just designed to go, go, go all the time. Now, when you do want to meet those pets' physical needs, or you want to engage them in this category, play is always a good go-to. Training is also going to typically incorporate a lot of physical movement, even if it's just going from stand to sit to down and back up again. That's like doing sit-ups for a human. So that's decent physical enrichment. And you can also look into species-specific sports. So even for our little animals, they have agility classes for rabbits. Whether you want to compete and socialize and do that offsite or just emulate it at home in your own environment, it's a great way to engage them. Obviously, we know there's a whole wealth of dog sports out there, and there are even classes for cats to do things like cat parkour, for example. So it's definitely pretty easy to meet your pet's needs. And I really like to do this a lot with my pets with training. So this is actually just a short clip. I'm working with my horse. He unfortunately suffered a pretty nasty bee sting right under his belly, so he's not rideable right now, so I can't put a saddle on him. So we're doing some training on the ground, which is mentally engaging for him. It's social because we're interacting with each other. And this particular simple exercise also increased his physical enrichment as well. So you can see it's really simple. He's just learning to follow that target around the square that I'm in. Our ultimate goal is that he'll be able to do this without the target and that physical barrier that I have created. But he knows to follow, and he touches, he gets a click and a treat. So he knows that he has done a job well. And he is just walking, so it doesn't look all that impressive, but he was really engaged and enjoying this. So we did this for an hour. So for an hour, he walked around. That's a good amount of physical movement for him. So that's one of his needs met while also engaging him socially and mentally. Big things with this, so my caveat before we move on to our next category is make sure that you're listening to your pet. So don't overdo. If you're bringing your dog home every day from a walk and they are collapsing on the floor in a big dog puddle, probably too much. You know, if you're starting to see pets getting stiff, not wanting to move as much, or big things is if you're picking up that wand to play with your cat or picking up the leash to take your dog for a walk and they don't come running, they're telling you they don't really want to do that anymore. So we need to make sure that we listen to our pets, and that's going to be an ongoing theme here. This is not going to be a one-size-fits-all sort of situation. And I certainly experienced that with mine. So my dogs, for example, I have 2 dogs that will literally run or walk with me until their paws fall off of their bodies, and they love it. One of my girls, though, she's good with like maybe a mile a day, and then that's enough, and she doesn't really want to go anymore. And so I listen to that. I may take my other 2 out for longer walks or multiple walks, but my girl Carmen, she gets 1, and then instead of going with us, if we do more physical activity, she'll get something to engage herself, maybe mentally, or even allow her some time to relax and be calm at home while I take the other 2 away. So our next category of enrichment is my favorite category, and one that is often overlooked. And that's just because up until maybe the last 2 decades or so, this hasn't been really stressed in the household environment. So we've done a ton of cognitive research on captive wild animals in zoos and research centers all the way back into the early 1900s and honestly even well before that. But we really weren't taking what we knew and applying it to the animals we were keeping in our homes. So this is one of the most overlooked enrichment categories, which is unfortunate because a lack of mental enrichment can be the root cause of a whole slew of behavioral problems. So when I work with individuals that have dogs in particular, but even cats as well, that are just not behaving in a manner that is appropriate in a home, whether they're being overly reactive, cats that are maybe hissy and swatty, or I always love the ones where cats are basically hunting their owners in their home. It's often because they're just not getting enough mental engagement. So it's definitely one of the first categories I look to address. Now, mental engagement is amazing, and it's a lot easier to manage sometimes than physical enrichment. So you can see this is my family here, and we're working in a group training sesh. So you can see that everybody is on their own place. They all have their own blanket or mat that they lay on, and that's where they work from. And this is great exercise for them. And again, meeting multiple categories. We'll get some light physical going on. There's social, we're all here working together. And then of course, mental is going to be a big one. And some of the benefits of this is that it is more tiring than physical exercise. So that is where I said I agree, but also sometimes disagree with the a tired dog is a good dog concept. Because usually when we say that, then people automatically think if their dog is being a bit bonkers or a bit naughty in the home, the solution is automatically longer walks, more playtime. Most of the time, the solution is more training and mental engagement. So if we all think back to our school days, we all came off the bus at the end of the day exhausted after finals, for example, because we really had to work our brains. We were sitting in a chair all day long at a desk, but it was mentally taxing, which is almost more exhausting than physical exercise. Because ultimately, physical exercise is going to pump us full of endorphins. So it's great for our body, it is great for our brain, but in and of itself, it is not enough to then later on effectively address calming enrichment, for example, because we're still fired up. Mental enrichment can help exhaust that surplus of energy. It also can encourage independence, which is another enrichment category, because we're asking our animals to work things out on their own, and can also encourage a lot of free thinking. So by engaging in mental enrichment, we're incorporating several other categories as well. Now, how to do this effectively? Basically, your options are almost endless. So training is a great one. So my animals, we train every day. But again, I stress we have to listen to our pets. Make sure you're not overdoing and frustrating them. So if you start to see things sort of fall apart on you, it's okay to quit, because sometimes our animals are not in the mood, or they can't learn, or they have just reached capacity for that day. That is okay. You can also incorporate things like puzzles, so different ways for them to acquire their food, which also hits on that foraging category, which we'll be talking about here shortly. You can encourage a lot of sensory stimulation as well. So dogs, for example, have a very large portion of their brain dedicated to their olfactory sense, so their sense of smell. So even doing things like spraying a scent of the day, not only is that providing that scent enrichment and environmental enrichment, but it engages a large chunk of their brain as well, which can tucker them out. By nose work is also often recommended and very effective. And mental enrichment can also include the demonstration of species-specific behaviors. So we can do things like provide appropriate scratching locations for our cat. That is also mental engagement, as well as physical and species-specific instinctive enrichment as well. And you can go on and on with all of the different species that you may have in your home. Now, our next category is social. And I really wanted to start this off by just saying again, and I know I'm being redundant, that we have to listen to our pets. So this is a category where I see a lot of pet owners go at with gusto, and I love that. That is awesome. But we also have to remember that not all animals want friends. And some animals are okay if it's just us. That's fine. So make sure that you're allowing your pet the ability to choose. We're not just going to endlessly drag our dog to a dog park. They may not care for that. And in fact, in those large sort of areas, most of the time it's not an effective strategy, because it's going to be too high arousal and it's going to be stressful. And we also have to question whether or not our pets are safe and secure. Are they actually physically safe in those environments, and do they feel safe in those environments? And in my experience, the answer to that is largely they don't. So it's not always an effective enrichment strategy, but you really need to follow your pet's lead. Now, other things that I like to stress, and this is going to relate more specifically to dogs than any other species, but we can generalize it, is that we have to let them play. So you're going to hear a lot of vocalizations. You're going to probably see some roughhousing. With dogs especially, you may even see some humping. Those are all acceptable play behaviors. And as long as both parties are happily engaging in that activity, we need to leave them alone. So I see a lot of social enrichment inadvertently squashed by owners because we get nervous when our dogs, for example, are really just, they're being dogs. So we have to make sure that we allow that. And I have this quick video of my kids just to kind of show you what I mean. So my girls there, they are biting at each other and jumping on each other and barking. There's my boy getting into the fray there, and he's more of a runner than a wrestler, so he takes them all on a merry chase. But they're all fine. They're body slamming each other. They're zooming all over the place. There's lots of vocalizations, particularly from my pity Carmen. Whoops, we have a little slide into a fence, but she gets up, shakes it off. She's okay. So I'm gonna just let them go ahead and do that. They're demonstrating species-specific behaviors, and this is a style of play and social enrichment that they are comfortable with. So you have to know your pet, you have to be willing to listen to them, and you have to be able to allow them to play as they are meant to for whatever species that we were looking at. Okay. Our next category is foraging, and this one is one that we overlook a lot, and that is just because of the practices that pet owners have fallen into just over the last, well, honestly, I think pretty much since we brought pets into our homes. And that is that we just dump food into a bowl and we plop it on the ground. We do it for horses, we do it for cats and dogs and lizards. We just dump it there and we give it to them. But the truth of the matter is that animals actually need to work for their food. So when we think about their wild counterparts, you know, let's say a lion, they don't just stumble across a zebra steak all set up and ready to go for them. They have to work for it. And when we have studied this in controlled environments, the results have indicated that animals will actually bypass free food, so bowls of food, and go to a station where they have to engage themselves mentally, physically, or otherwise to acquire that food, because that's what their species-specific instinctive behavior dictates that they do. So this is a concept that's called contra freeloading. So we all know what freeloading is, right? Let's say we have all had somebody do that to us, crash on our couch endlessly, steal our food, things like that. Animals don't want to be that freeloader. They want to contra freeload, which means they want to work for it instead. And by providing that opportunity, we're fulfilling multiple enrichment categories. So how we do that is we really have to identify the species-specific behavior of the animal in our care. So there's not going to be a one-size-fits-all option here. So you can do things like scatter feeding. So for animals that are natural foragers and scavengers, scatter feeding is awesome and it's simple. So I do that with my horse. So he doesn't get his grain just in a pail or a feed tub for him to eat out of. I take it and I throw it across the ground. He has to walk around and find it. I do that with my dogs a lot as well, especially in the nice weather. I sometimes even intentionally let my grass in my yard get a little bit high, and I go out and I spread their food out in the yard, and they have to sniff around, they have to walk around, and they have to find that food because they're natural scavengers. That's an inherent instinctive behavior for them, and it's very fulfilling. And it doesn't just meet this foraging need, it meets a physical need, mental need, and we're also seeing sensory stimulation as well. Now, for animals like cats, for example, they're not foragers, they're tried and true hunters. So it might be that we're not necessarily changing the way that we're offering the food, but it might be changing what we're doing before the food. So cats have a very specific sequence of behaviors that in an ideal circumstance, they like to demonstrate. So they like to hunt, catch, kill, and then eat. So if you've got a cat in your home, a good way to enrich them is engage them in play behavior that allows them to be predatory. So they can pounce on something and grab it and inflict a kill bite and then give them their food. So that way it's enriching, we're doing species-specific behaviors, and it allows them to eat and forage in a way that is ideal for that particular type of animal. We can also do puzzle feeding as well. Dogs have a whole slew of different puzzles available to them, from something as simple as just a slow feeder, which is a bowl that has different patterns and configurations inside of it that causes them to have to work food through to get it, to more complex puzzles where they may have to open up a drawer or pull out a toy to get the correct item that they would like. And you could even see puzzles like this. So this is something simple that my horse is working on. He loves his carrots, but he doesn't just get them. I slide his carrots through this ball that dangles from a rafter in the ceiling, and he has to work out how to grab them out of that ball. So this takes these 4 carrots, which would normally take him probably a minute or less to actually eat, and this turns it into a half-an-hour activity. And you heard me praising him there in the background. I will advocate for that. This was the first time he had tried this ball moved away from the wall where it was a little bit harder. When we are engaging with our pets and using puzzles, we have to make sure that one, we're working with their skill level. So don't start at the hardest puzzle possible, make something simple first and then work your way up. And make sure that you're there to offer encouragement, to praise them, and to step in if you need to. And I always stress, don't step in right away, but step in if you need to if they're starting to get frustrated. So if they're ready to walk away from that high value item, we have to step in and help them out a little bit, because otherwise they're not going to want to engage anymore with us in that manner. Now we can also address foraging enrichment by timing the way that we feed our animals. So I did mention it again in the beginning of our presentation about not wanting to just leave food out 24/7. And that's really important, especially for our obligate and facultative carnivores, so our hunters that we brought into our home. They are not designed to eat all day long. They should have their meals when they're hungry. So we really want to let them have a little bit of an empty belly and then provide some food, let them eat it up, pick it up again, let them get a little bit of an empty belly and feed them again. So that's actually really important for their instinctive species-specific behaviors, and it's actually how their digestive system is set up. Versus a horse or a rabbit or a guinea pig, they are herbivores and foragers. They're actually designed to basically graze all day long. So you want to make sure that they have that option. So for all of them, that's going to be grass or hay, depending on which animal we're talking about and where they're living. But we need to pay attention to that, and again, be cognizant of how that's going to change amongst species. Then our next enrichment category is instinctive behaviors. And this one is usually, again, comprised of the things that we don't like about our pets. So these are all of those residual wild animal behaviors that maybe we were hoping our pets would forget about by the time they got to our homes. And a lot of these instinctive behaviors are the things that I have been called out about when I used to train independently, the naughty things that pets were doing that were irritating their owners. It's just an expression of natural behavior. And so my answer when I would have these complaints and concerns is that I can't ask a dog to not be a dog. I can't ask a cat to not be a cat, but we can show them how to demonstrate these behaviors in a way that doesn't irritate us and doesn't ruin our stuff. So that's really going to be your key motivator in addressing this enrichment category. So I used these examples before, we'll bring them up again. Digging, counter surfing, scratching furniture. These are common complaints amongst all pet owners. But really, it's just our pets trying to be the animals that they're supposed to be. So we have to provide a positive outlet and allow those behaviors to be expressed. We cannot punish them because, again, we can't get mad at a cat for being a cat. They're just doing what they're supposed to do. We have to provide them a way to do it that doesn't irritate us. So if you've got a digging animal, whether that be a dog, a cat, or a lizard, so you see this is my bearded dragon beetle, she's a huge digger, you can provide them a dig box. So my dogs in my backyard, they have a sandbox, and to encourage them to dig there and not in my yard, because my boy is also a big digger, I hide treats in it. So it's not always available to them because I like to keep it new and enriching, but they do get sandbox time. And before I open it up for them, I am hiding high value items in there. So I'm putting their water buffalo horns in there, and I'm putting a meaty bone in there, something that's really going to engage them. And they can dig to their heart's content in there. And because I have that space, if I were to turn them out and they're digging in my garden instead of getting mad at them and yelling at them and punishing them for being dogs, I can just redirect them and say, cool, you guys want to dig today? I get that. You're just being a dog. Dig here, and then we're okay. And they're really amenable to that. My lizard has a dig box as well. So she's got a space in her tank where she can go and dig and root around, which is important for her because also as a female bearded dragon, she lays eggs periodically. So she needs to have a space where she feels safe and secure to do that. And that's going to be in her dig box. Nose work is a great way to allow your pet to demonstrate instinctive behaviors, using that nose to seek out food. That's usually what they're doing when they're counter surfing. Give them an activity where that's allowed, whether that's in your backyard, in your home, however you want to work that out. Make sure they have an outlet for that scent and search and find behavior, which you're going to see across most species. They're going to enjoy that type of activity. Training is going to allow them to demonstrate some instinctive behaviors. That's how we also teach a lot of our pets to do all those cool tricks. Look at what they want to do naturally. So if you've got a dog that barks all the time, you can teach them to sing on cue. If you've got a dog that's hyperactive and jumpy and spinny, you can start working with them on spinning and dancing on cue. It's a great way to let them demonstrate those behaviors that are natural to them. And that's a lot of what you see in zoos. You may have seen that if you've seen a recent dolphin show, for example. They're not having those animals do anything super wild and crazy. They're just demonstrating behaviors that those animals would demonstrate naturally in the wild. And we can do the same thing for our pets in our home. For cats with scratching, for example, we have to provide them an outlet for that behavior. Cats are going to scratch. There's no way around that. They have to. It's an instinctive behavior. That's how they scent mark, and that's how they feel safe and secure in their environment. So we can't punish or take that ability away from them. We just have to provide outlets for that. And of course, we can also adjust our environment as needed. And again, that's meeting the expectations and needs of our particular animal. So I can use horses as an example. A lot of folks that have horses like to see them locked up tight in a stall at night. It makes us feel safe and secure, that they're okay and out of harm's way. But a lot of horses mentally struggle with that because their instinctive behavior is to be out in the open where they can observe their surroundings. That helps them feel safe and secure. And they are an animal that's really designed to move almost constantly. So always keeping them in a stall can be contraindicated. So it makes us feel good, doesn't always make them feel good. So we have to keep that in mind as we address the instinctive needs of our pets. Not always something that we were super keen on doing, but it is something that they need to do. Okay, so the last couple of things I want to address is one, the importance of independence. So that is one of our enrichment categories, and something that I wanted to address specifically given our current climate. So for most of us, we're coming out of sheltering in place. For some, we're still working at home, we're working limited hours. And then even if we're working our normal schedule now, we're still home a bit more. There's no going out to the movies, restaurants are still, kind of hit or miss right now. So we're spending a lot more time at home, which is awesome because we get to spend a lot more time with our pets. But this is not our normal schedule, and it can be a little overwhelming for our animals because they did have this sort of inherent independence from us because we were gone from, say, 9 to 5 every day. Now maybe we're not, or we're not going out on Friday nights anymore. So we've really started to impact their schedule, which impacts their feeling of independence. So I stress the need to maintain as realistic of a schedule as possible. So that's why right now, myself, I'm largely working at home, but I am downstairs in my office, and my dogs don't typically come down here. So this still gives them that sense of distance and independence from me that they normally would have had. And I also encourage them to be independent from me and from each other by our activity choices, the training that we do, just to make sure that they do feel comfortable basically in their own skin and in their own space. And we can do this sort of passively by rewarding our animals for settling. So if they choose to flop down on their bed and not necessarily have to sit right here next to you while you're watching TV, reward them. I'm an advocate for keeping treats all around the house stashed in drawers. So when my dogs go flop out on a bed, again, not right here next to me, then I grab a handful of Cheerios and toss them over there for them. They get a reward for choosing to settle and be independent. I take regular time away from my pets. So I choose to work in a space where they generally don't frequent in my home and that I can actually kind of isolate them away from. I also will try to take trips to the store on a regular basis obviously without them. I go for walks or bike rides without them from time to time. So they're okay and comfortable with me leaving the house. And that also allows them to take time away from me. And I don't force it if they don't necessarily want to cuddle. One of my dogs, my boy, is not the biggest snuggler. So if he chooses to go in the bedroom when I'm in the living room or vice versa, that's okay. And I want to encourage that. We also need to make sure that they have the ability to figure things out on their own. And that's another huge aspect of independence that we struggle with because we want to get our fingers in there, we want to nitpick, we want to be involved, and that's not necessarily what our pets need. So yes, I advocate for helping them out if they're getting very frustrated when you're doing mental enrichment with, say, puzzles, for example, but try not to step in too soon. We need to let them work on it and develop those problem-solving skills. And even if they're getting into a little bit of a scrape with each other, for example, obviously we don't want anybody to hurt each other, but sometimes we do have to wait, take a breath, let them figure it out before we jump in. So that's actually what I've got pictured here on the slide. That is my horse Rio there, and he is in a fight with one of his friends in the pasture. And yes, my inclination would have been to break him up, to stop that behavior, but they have to figure it out on their own. So unless they're hurting each other, let them figure it out. And then the last component of enrichment we're going to talk about before addressing bringing it all home is agency. So agency is really just a fancy word for choice, and it can be defined as the ability to have some control over one's environment and to be able to make choices that will result in a desirable outcome. Excuse me, I forgot how to use the English language there for a moment. So we need to give our animals the ability to choose and to always feel like they have the ability to choose. So that goes back to that independence as well. They need to feel like they are capable. So we want to do this because we want to avoid learned helplessness, where basically an animal does what we say because they feel like they don't have any outlet or choice in the matter. That's mentally unhealthy, and that can cause them to deteriorate psychologically, emotionally, and even physically in the long term. So we have to make sure that they have the right to say no, they have the right to say when, if we're training, for example, and that we are working with what they like and what they don't like, and really acknowledging that and accepting who our pets are rather than trying to force them into a mold of who we want them to be. And always be flexible and open to adjustments when you're developing an enrichment plan. So when we're providing choice, again, we really want to allow for options, whether that's environmental locations or interactions with environmental stimuli. Big areas for agency is allowing them to choose whether they want social interactions and then choosing who they want those with, whether that's other animals, with you, again, gauging things like comfort level with strangers. Physical exercise, again, we don't need to drag all of our dogs on 10-mile runs. Make sure you're listening to what they're saying. And ultimately, again, let them say when. So when they have had enough, we need to hear that, respect that, and respond appropriately. Okay, so we're wrapping up now by talking about bringing enrichment into your own home. So helping to keep your pets engaged and happy. So bringing it home, we really need to identify your pet's specific needs. So you can read dozens of books on enrichment that will tell you exactly how to enrich your dog or your cat or your lizard or your horse or whatever it is that you have in your home. And that's a great way to develop a foundation of ideas. But you have to know what your specific pet needs. And we have to remember, we can read all the books that we want. They don't read those books though. So they may have a different idea about what's enriching for them. So observation is going to be absolutely key. You want to make sure that you're addressing species-specific behavior while also keeping in mind personal preferences and listening to your pet. So you can see here, this is my cat Bliss, and I'm asking her to work for some of her food. So she has a little licky mat right there, and that's a little raw pureed chicken. Gross, but she loves it, and it's smeared onto that licky mat, and then I freeze it. So she's got to work a little harder for some of her food. And we actually engaged in a pretty rousing game of play before she got that. So we were bringing in some of those instinctive behaviors and natural foraging, feeding behaviors for a cat. Now, when you are trying to develop an enrichment plan, make sure you stick to it. So I see a lot of folks start off gung-ho, and then it gets a little lazier, we skip some days, and then ultimately we just kind of go back into our old patterns of behavior. So I find that it's extremely helpful to put it in writing. So I do that every month for all of my animals because it keeps me honest. It lets me stay focused. And I also am able to document my observations more effectively. So I create a calendar for my pets every month, and then I try to jot down a few notes on that calendar about who liked what went well, maybe some different ideas or ways to modify the enrichment that I provided, so that way I can make it more effective for my animals. I also encourage you to get creative. So I've given you some ideas here. I'll give you a few more in just a moment, but there's really no right or wrong answer here. You can really try just about anything as long as your animal feels safe, secure, has that ability to demonstrate species-specific behaviors, and they're there to guide them and help them out. Have at it and have fun, and make sure that your pets are having fun as well. So here's an example of an enrichment calendar. This is mine. So you can see my dogs are listed at the top. So I've got Groot is the G in blue, Carmen is the red, the C in red, Lulabelle is the green there, and then I have my cat Bliss in purple with that B, my horse Rio in blue with the R, and then my lizard Beetle in the orange as the BT. Now this is just my first week and a half in July, so this is the schedule that I've got planning for them for next month. And you can see we do some everyday activities. So every morning I take all 3 of my dogs out for a sniffy walk, which means I let their noses dictate where we go. So if they want to stop and sniff a tree for 20 minutes, we sniff a tree for 20 minutes. I don't have a designated distance that we need to go or direction, so I let them guide me. We also do a scent of the day, so I scent the house every single day. And every single day we do some level of training, whether that's one training session, whether it's a couple scattered throughout the day. I do vary that a little bit, and I will vary what our goal is, but we do get together for that mental enrichment. And I generally do it as a group, so we also incorporate social as well. For my cat Bliss every day, she also gets scent of the day. She gets cat TV, which is just a windows. That's one of a cat's favorite things to do. They actually spend the bulk of their day looking out windows. So if our windows aren't actively open, if it's too hot, she has a number of cat platforms, so she can hang out and watch that cat TV to her heart's content. And to make that even more fulfilling for her, I have strategically placed some bird feeders right outside of some of her favorite windows, so she can watch the birds come and go as well. Every day she also works on training, and every day we usually do wand play, so the long wand for her to chase. Sometimes we spice that up and change that about, but every time right before she eats, we engage in 10 to 15 minutes of hunt, catch, kill behaviors, so she can then eat in a species-specific way. For my horse Rio, he gets to go out and graze with a herd every day, so he gets to forage, he gets social time, he gets environmental enrichment. Every day when he does come into his private paddock, when he stays outside during nice weather, or if he does come inside due to bad weather, I make sure his hay is spread. So there are a lot of different ways to contain hay for horses now. There's nets and different containers and tubs to put it in to make it neater, but that's not species specific. Horses are meant to walk about and really filter through debris and move around the ground to find the food that they want. So I take his hay and I rip it apart and I scatter it all over the ground for him. And every day he gets groomed. So that's a hygiene thing for him as well as a social activity. My lizard Beetle gets an hour out of her tank, whether that be just running around in the living room while I observe her. We have a sunroom that she enjoys. Sometimes she runs around in our bathroom, wherever she'd like, and we try to change up those locations. And every day I try to take her outside for a walk as well so she can get some sunshine, but that is weather permitting because she's obviously not a cold weather creature. And then the rest of the time, you can see that I try to spice it up. There are some days where they'll all do pretty much the same thing. So you can see on July 4th, I have plans for popsicles, which is frozen bone broth, water, and treats that I provide for my dogs. And my cat gets a kitty cube, which is an ice cube variation of that. That's just size specific for her. That same day, my horse Rio is going to get his carrot bowl filled up, and my lizard Beetle is going to be scatter fed, which means I'm going to take all of her greens from her salad, and instead of providing it in a bowl, which I do sometimes, I'm going to scatter it all over her tank. So she's going to have to run around and find all of the food that she needs to eat. But every day I try to offer them something different. And of course, I'm always open to being flexible. So there are some times, for example, on the 1st, I want to take Carmen outside and work on an activity called a flirt pole. But if it's raining, we're going to have to amend that. So you have to be able to put something in writing and have a plan, but make sure you're being flexible with it. And there are certainly times when I think that I'm going to take one of my dogs for a car ride, or we're going for a long walk, or I'm going to try something like putting a pool in the backyard for them to splash in, and they go outside and they look at it and go, not today. So then I have to adjust on the fly and give them something else that's engaging for them in this mindset that they're in currently. But I recommend doing this for everybody, whether you've got one pet at home or like me, you have a zoo, it's a great way to keep track of things and really start to identify what your pets like, what they don't like, what works well in your home, and what maybe doesn't work so well. So that way it can give you an idea of how to formulate an effective plan for your pet. Now, to assess your plan as you've created it, I always recommend the SPIDER framework. This is what's utilized in zoos and in most animal shelters as well. So SPIDER is an acronym. So you're going to start by setting goals, and you're going to do that by identifying your pet's needs. So some of that's going to be based on what you already know about your pet and their individual preferences. And then the rest is going to be at least started on that foundation of what you know that specific species needs, and then you will just amend it around your pet's likes and dislikes. Then you're going to plan. So you're going to develop a process to obtain your goals. So what do you want to see with your pet? Are they able to settle more effectively? Do they seem more generally enriched and happy? Do you want to see a reduction in anxiety? Set some goals and plan for how to achieve them. Then the next step is implementation. So that's putting your plan in action and being consistent. Then documentation. So you're going to observe how your pet engages with the enrichment offered and try to record results, even if it's just something as simple as a star next to something they love and a cross through for something that they didn't like. Then following your documentation, you're going to evaluate to determine effectiveness. And that's where you're going to weed out the activities that didn't go well or weren't super enriching for your pet, or you're going to think of ways to amend and change them. And that falls into our next step in the SPIDER framework, which is readdress. So we're then going to look at the program as a whole, and we're going to tweak where we need to increase success and improve the quality of life for our pets. Now, the last thought that I have for you is work smart, not hard. So you don't need to run yourself ragged. So hopefully you saw my calendar there. I have 3 dogs, a cat, a lizard, and a horse. All 3 of my dogs are working breed dogs. My cat is a maniac. My horse is 22 and still thinks he's a yearling. Everybody is nuts. But I'm pretty relaxed on a day-to-day basis because I've learned how to meet their needs, keep them busy and out of my hair without exhausting myself. So even when we're thinking about things like physical exercise, it doesn't always have to include you. So we have to remember that we get tired first. So even if we take our dogs out for a 10-mile run, which I do regularly, especially with my cattle dog, she loves it. I come home and I need to sleep for a week or so to recover, and she's bouncing around me going, yeah, what's next? So obviously for me, exhausting. For her, engaging and fun and makes her ready to keep on going. So we have to definitely consider that when we look at enrichment, and that's why I stress physical is a part of enrichment, but it shouldn't be a main focus because that will still leave a gap in your animal's needs. So make sure that you're not only identifying your pet's needs when you're writing out your enrichment calendar, but know your own schedule as well, and make sure you're being realistic when you're planning. So use tools that are available. Make sure that you're purchasing or making your own enrichment items to help facilitate even just doing things like eating breakfast a little bit trickier for them. So that way you can engage them physically, mentally, possibly socially, and in other ways, like without running yourself ragged. And make sure that you're working their brains, because that is going to be a way to really kind of exhaust them and satisfy them, get them ready to calm down and relax, which is also enriching, and maybe engage some of their senses as well, all within the normal schedule of your day. So for example, feeding pets breakfast sometimes can't be a huge event because we're brushing our teeth and taking a shower and getting dressed and getting ready to work, but we can do with just a few simple things, make that breakfast a little bit trickier for our pets, make them work for their food, make them engage their senses, all while we're still getting ourselves ready, which is what I've done here in this video. So this is my dog Carmen, and I obviously stopped to take the video, but I normally would be getting ready for work. So I just put her breakfast in an egg carton and I put it on the floor. So she's got to slide it around. She had to figure out how to open it. And then she has to get all of those little kibbles and meaty bits out of each one of those egg holding compartments. So it's mentally engaging, it was physically engaging, she's using her senses. So this was an enriching experience for her that I could go ahead and just go get ready for work while she was working on it. So definitely make sure you're considering that work smart and not hard when you're developing an enrichment plan. Okay, so we've got a few minutes left. I would be happy to take any questions. So let me see Okay, so let's see here. This is an excellent question, so let me read this aloud for everybody. So since vigilance, alarm, and avoidance behaviors are part of most species' behavioral repertoires, do you feel there is any benefit to including minimally aversive stimuli in an enrichment program? For example, filling a puzzle feeder with a food that is safe, but which an animal dislikes. Or briefly exposing a prey species to a sensory stimuli from a predator, playing raptor vocalizations for parrots, or giving a rodent a piece of snake shed. So my answer to that is yes, I think that that can be beneficial as long as it's done in a controlled way. So we actually are starting to see that in modern zoo development. So a lot of our zoos around here are still kind of archaic, but when we see modern zoos, instead of having things like large cat row and then our ungulates over here, they're starting to mix animals up. So you might see a lion enclosure next to a zebra pasture, for example. So they might be able to see each other. They can definitely smell each other. It invokes some hunting responses in the lions. It makes the zebras a little bit more vigilant. So that is enriching for them and does allow them to engage in species-specific behaviors. My caveat for that for domestic animals is they may not have the same responses. So some will. So cats, for example, I would argue that aren't really domesticated at all, but dogs very much so are. So they may not have the same responses, and it can just be stress-inducing for them. So you have to just monitor your pet well. It's not a bad idea. You just want to make sure that you're not providing that source of enrichment at the expense of their safety and security. So as long as it's minimal, and as long as you're controlling it and removing it if it is becoming a source of stress, then absolutely, you can definitely include some of those minimally aversive stimuli to just kind of keep them on their toes a little bit and keep them engaged in their environment, as long as they still overall feel safe and secure. Okay. So another question, what are some suggestions for our dog which is not very food motivated? Excellent question. So that's something I get every time I do any sort of talk about animals. I have a pet that's not food motivated. So all animals are food motivated. They have to be because you need to eat to survive. However, that doesn't mean that every pet is going to be willing to move through a really complex puzzle to get to that food. It might not mean that much to them. So my answer to that is if you are using food in an enrichment activity, like puzzle feeding, scatter feeding, things like that, it may not be something that you're doing specifically with their meals, but that you might be doing with a highly priced treat. So my dog, Groot, who is the dog pictured there on the far right of the bench, he could kind of take or leave some of his food, which led me onto a long, long journey of food exploration with him to find something that he was crazy about. It turns out it's baked chicken. He loves it more than anything. So I may not give him a puzzle feeder for his dinner, because if I did that, he would just say, oh, that's fine, I'm gonna skip dinner tonight. But instead, I'll allow him to eat his dinner, and then I might engage him in an experience with that high price item. And if you are worried about calories, if you've got a pet that's a little thicker in the midsection than you'd like, then what you do is you just downsize either a breakfast or a dinner portion, and then you increase or you provide that hole in their calories by giving them that more enriching item. But usually when you find a pet that's not food motivated, it's usually because we need to do a little bit more of investigative work to find out what they really like, because there's going to be something out there. You just might have to step outside of the box to find it. But if it is something that you find where your pet is consistently refusing food, even when you try to provide that variety, or they're just not interested, then my next suggestion too is just to make sure that there's nothing medically wrong. So in the case of my boy, he actually suffers from some pretty profound acid reflux, which makes him feel a little irpy in his belly, and then he doesn't want food generally, but he actually did have an existing medical condition that needed to be addressed. So definitely look to that. Make sure you are exploring multiple options. And again, you have to work with your individual dog, so or animal in general. So my two girls, I could feed them Cheerios. Again, it's a very low value item. I could put that in a complex puzzle feeder and they will work on it for hours, because that's how much they need those Cheerios. My boy, puzzle feeders, not really his jam. It's just not his thing, even with high value items. So I enrich him in other ways. So he loves nose work. So he likes using those scent cones. At first, he didn't have the confidence or the independence to do it on his own. So I would run around in the backyard with him, and I would even run up to the cones where I knew I had hidden tuna, which he does like. And I would point them out for him at first and then praise him heavily for finding it. And that made it more engaging for him. And now he is more independent, more confident, and more invested in those food items. And now he engages in those enrichment activities on his own. All right, next question. Will puzzles help train dogs who inhale their food slow down and eat like a normal dog? If not, what would I suggest? I've tried recommending everything I can think of to owners, but it's not working out well. Yes, so puzzle feeders can absolutely help train dogs to slow down. Another big enrichment, and I mentioned it briefly, that I advocate for dogs that really like to gulp their food, because we know that's not healthy for them, and depending on the dog breed could put them at a higher risk for things like bloat, is scatter feeding. So if owners don't have the time or the capacity to work on training with a dog with puzzle feeders, which not everybody is going to want to do that, and again, not every dog will engage, you can scatter feed. So that's just going to be taking whatever they are eating, whether it's kibble, raw, whatever they're eating, and tossing it over an area. And just like with anything else, start simple. So maybe start on a kitchen floor, keep it in a small area, but scatter it about on the floor, then bring the dog in, allow them to eat. And then as they get more proficient at that, you can make it more complicated. So my cattle dog, who's there in the middle of that slide, she is a gulper and has actually made me concerned about choking hazards. So her food, I actually take outside in my backyard, weather pending, and I toss it all around in the yard, and she takes 45 minutes sniffing around to find every piece. And that prevents her from gulping her food and possibly putting herself at a health risk as well. So those are things that I would definitely recommend for pets that get a little overindulgent in their eating habits. And even for puzzles, you can do things simple. So another thing that I do frequently with my food gulper is I will take her food and I make a roll out of a towel, and I just start to hide the food in that towel roll. So she has to slowly unroll it, get a little food, unroll a little more, get a little more food. It helps slow her down while still being an engaging experience for her. Okay, so those were awesome questions, by the way. Thank you very much for those. It looks like those are all the questions that we had. So we are right about at 8:30, so I kept us on track. Yay me, I'm not always good at that. If anybody comes up with any additional questions, something that pops into your brain tomorrow, tonight, 3 weeks down the road, my email is here on the slide. It is humane.education@dupage.co.org, and I am always available and thrilled to help you with any questions that you may have. So have a lovely evening, everyone, and hopefully I'll see you in some of our future presentations. So definitely keep an eye on the social media for the shelter. That's where we advertise all of our upcoming programs. Thanks. Bye.